Hockey on the agenda today. It's Bob McCown. It's John Shannon.
7 days to the deadline, isn't it? Is it 7 days? No, it's a little while.
More than that.
It's 2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Well, not quite. When is it? Is it the 21st?
21st. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's 12 days.
12 days. Yeah.
That's not 2 weeks, John.
Well,
Your
I
math
take
is
a day.
little shabby.
I take a day off.
You take
week.
Sundays off.
That's right.
Good.
They don't count.
Then you're accurate. I think, or you're further off. I'm not sure which. As I was about to say, we thank you for listening to the podcast or on Sirius XM channel 167. We're going to talk hockey today. I don't think we're going to talk much about the trade deadline, but we'll see. It is not my favorite topic, as Shannon well knows. Eric Duhatschek will join us. I was going to say he lives in Calgary, but he only lives in Calgary kind of half the year.
Correct.
And when the Flames are playing, he goes to California. So figure that one out. Kind of the kind of deal I think all hockey people would like. And Kevin Paul Dupont of the Boston Globe joins us from Beantown. We'll get to them and see what happens after these messages. We are back. It's McCown. It's Shannon with you. Some hockey talk today. Eric Duhatschek is with us from Los Angeles, the winter home of the Duhatscheks. And Kevin Paul Dupont is at home in Boston.
Winter and summer.
Thank you.
What's the difference in Boston?
Very good. You're one to talk.
Oh, no. Pot calling kettle black.
Yeah.
Let's get this topic out of the way right off the top. Shannon tells me everybody else that does podcasts around hockey or hockey podcasts is engrossed in speculation about the upcoming trade deadline and all the dramatic and meaningful things that might happen. I don't know if you guys know my position on trade deadline day, but I think it's a colossal waste of time and money. But having said that, I want to give you guys an opportunity to chime in and tell us what your expectations are. What big earth-shattering, standings-altering moves would you expect to be made between now and, well, what, a little over a week from now? Duhatschek, kick it off.
None. Because I'm like you. I always go back to that whole old Brian Burke line about more mistakes are made, more money is spent, more assets are frittered away in the hope of pursuing a Stanley Cup in a year where 32 teams in the league right now, one team has a chance to win, 31 teams go home with some level of disappointment. And when you sift through the ashes of who made a difference, you pretty much have to go back to, I think, 2014. LA picked up Marian Gaborik from Columbus. I think they gave up a second and a third. He led the playoffs in goal scoring. He made a meaningful, tangible difference to Los Angeles winning a Stanley Cup. So that's 8 years ago. And then we go back to Butch Goring in, what was it, John, 1980.
Yeah.
And there's a few examples in between of someone that made a tangible difference. I'm not talking about Washington picking up Michael Kempney and making a small contribution on a team that relied on Braden Holtby and Alex Ovechkin, or, Tampa picking up third liners, but really you win because of Vasilevsky, Hedman, and Kucherov. So I'm with you. I can't beat that drum. I do think you can make the odd selective addition to help your team. I do these trade boards too, because that's what we do. And I'm creeping Mark Giordano to the top of the trade board right now, because I'm looking at him as a guy that can come in and help a team that doesn't know how to defend in its own end. And he's got some leadership qualities. He's still got some game left. He's a terrific person, so he's easy to integrate. But your question was earth-shattering, life-changing, franchise-altering, and I don't see anything like that happening before the trade deadline.
KP?
Yeah, this almost sounds rehearsed because I'm so much in line with Eric here. But the only I would quibble a little bit on the Tampa end. I thought the additions of Goudreau and Coleman were excellent. Now, did that make them different? Your point, Eric, about Vasilevsky and all of it, Hedman, that's why they are what they are. But I thought those were key picks or key acquisitions. So if teams are doing that, good for them. Do they win without those two guys? They probably do, but I thought they were stabilizing or difference makers.
Well, let me go kind of the opposite direction.
Yeah.
Something that I don't think many of us pay any attention to. Can we document any sellers, any guys, any teams who were out of the playoffs who gave up a significant piece, and maybe that piece didn't help the team that they were going to, but did any of those teams grab a bunch of things that ultimately, maybe a year, 2 years later, help them? I don't even know if we document that kind of stuff, do we?
Well, what I would say is, yeah, you do go back in history sometimes and look at the haul. So, like a name that seems inconsequential at the time, or maybe it seems consequential, but has some future value, gets traded for a today asset. The Kevin's example of Coleman and Barclay Goodrow getting traded for first rounders. In time, you'll have to go back and figure out who those first rounders were. Exactly. And the impact they might have made. And then there's a few examples. I mean, the one that off the top of my head is, that trade deadline where Nashville picked up, the rights to Philip Forsberg for Martin Erat, and Washington wanted Erat, thought he was going to be a difference maker, wasn't, was out of the league probably within 2 or 3 years. And Philip Forsberg, evolved into a top player. He's been a top guy for Nashville right now. And there's talk about him possibly moving at the trade deadline because he's going to want to sign a, 8-year, $64 million extension. But he's been the face of that franchise for a long period of time. So yes, and I think you actually make a great point, Bob, because to me, the sellers often make out like bandits. Last year's a great example. I mean, Columbus got a couple of first-round picks back for, serviceable veterans. Like Savard probably helped Tampa win again, and Foligno, got hurt and didn't really help Toronto. But somewhere down the road, if those first-rounders become, top players in the National Hockey League, Columbus will look back at last year's trade deadline and say, yeah, we made out like bandits. So.
And I mean, and a team like Arizona that seems to be a landing spot for a lot of this because of their ability to take on cap space. We're not going to know for 5 years, Bob. That's the other issue when you talk about that scenario. And by then, and this is Bill Armstrong is a nice person, but by then, who's going to be the manager of the Arizona Coyotes? I mean, who knows how things change so quickly in the NHL? There are obviously some teams that feel they need to do something. But let me ask you this, Kevin. Does every team in this league right now need a tweak? Are there teams that are complete right now? Because you know as well as I do, you probably talk to more managers than I do now, but managers they've always got that trigger finger. They always want to do something. Are there teams that can say, no, we're comfortable, we're going to live with what we got, and we have a chance to win the cup?
I think they've all got foibles. I think that, and again, as a consequence of the cap system, every team is engineered to have holes now, just because you don't have the money to fill them all. So if teams are going at this, and this is, story after story you read, if they could get a top 4D or a top 6 forward, well, guess what? That's the July 1st conundrum. Mm-hmm. That's when you get those guys. So you're not filling those holes now. And that really is what's changed all of this is July 1 or whatever it is this year, July 14th, 17th, whatever the date is, that the whole open market that didn't exist when we all started covering the league, right? There was no real free agency. But now if you're really doing reconstructive surgery, that's the time to do it, not on the fly here with March 21, 3:00 coming down. It's just not a practical process. I will say I've seen the Bruins make a couple of deals that I thought were excellent deals. One in the old world and one in the new world. The old world would have been they gave up Juneau for Iafrate, and I loved Iafrate's game. Unfortunately, his career was over when he got here. Mm-hmm. Same in the new world, they made the deal for Nash. They didn't give up the equivalent of Joe Juneau. They did give up a first rounder, but that didn't work out because his career too was over. This is Rick Nash with the concussion. So, right. To go back to that statement about Brian Burke, it's true. They overstep, And sometimes they don't want to admit that these are imperfect products or damaged goods when they get them.
Well, there's another factor in this, and I don't know how big it is. You guys can tell me what you think, but I have long said that there are general managers, invariably, whether it's 1, 5, 10, who make relatively insignificant deals, fourth liner for fourth liner or fourth round draft choice for a fourth liner, who make those deals for no other reason than to justify that they did something in the public perception or maybe their owner's perception. And of course, an existing general manager almost invariably will deny that. But I've talked to, when we used to do the radio show, the last few years, I got several, well, one general manager I remember, and several ex-general managers who acknowledged they did exactly that, so that they could have the press conference after at 4:00 in the afternoon and say, well, this is what we did. And hockey fans will exaggerate the value of anything you do, either positively or negatively. So, I mean, I think, would we all concede that happens as part of the equation?
Sure,
too?
absolutely. I mean, I don't mind saying his name either. David Poile. It's a rite of spring for David Poile to have at least make one trade, right, Eric?
Yeah, well, but what I would say is that the subtext of all this is that there is value sometimes to making a lateral trade, and so I beat the drum for this all the time. And if you're like, if I'm managing the Calgary Flames right now, I'm treading very carefully. They've got some real good chemistry going there, and they are the one team that got out ahead of the trade deadline, which I applaud them for. And the player they targeted, so they know they have a coach, Daryl Sutter. It's not everybody's cup of tea. He has a manner that not every player adapts or adjusts to. So they have to be very careful. They've got this great season going. They've got real good chemistry. The player they bring in is Tyler Toffoli, played for Daryl Sutter in Los Angeles, knows how Daryl Sutter is, knows how he coaches, knows the system, knows the personality, and also has some familiarity with a lot of guys on the team. Played in LA with Lucic and Lewis, played junior hockey with Sean Monahan. They felt very confident that he would be a fit. So fit to me is absolutely critical. Bob, you talk about the things we don't talk about enough. To me, fit is the one thing that drives me crazy. You make a trade at the trade deadline, you got 5 weeks to bring a guy in. You better know what his family situation is, how many kids he's got in school, how many kids are not in school, what they're going to do. Does the family stay behind? Does the family come with them? If they come with them, do they go into a hotel? Do they have to find a house for them? If a player is distracted for the first 5 weeks that he's in his new place by things that are happening on the home front, he just never gets it done on the ice. So the one thing that I think general managers have to spend a more time doing, and I think they are, but because I think that they're more aware of life consequences, is make sure the person you're bringing in, whether it's for a move that you think is proactive and going to help you, or the kind of lateral trade that you're talking about, you better make sure that person fits. Because if it doesn't fit, then it hurts you on two levels. It damages the chemistry of a team that you think is good and has a chance to win, and you're giving up something basically for nothing.
Yeah, don't forget Toffoli also was a teammate, a few of those guys in Vancouver too, Eric. I think of Chris Tanev and Jacob Markstrom. So there is a ton of familiarity beyond Daryl Sutter for Tyler Toffoli in that organization. And here's the other one, it probably was easier for Toffoli to go from a Canadian city to a Canadian city. Albeit
another factor this year for sure, John.
Absolutely.
It was probably a whole lot easier for him to leave that Montreal team when he did than what it would have been today.
Although I tell you what, Kevin, if you watch the Montreal Canadiens today and you listen to their fan base, this is the happiest 32nd team in the National Hockey League. I mean, they are overjoyed. I mean, they're playing well. They seem to be having fun. Every word coming out of the organization is that we've got a new life. And they're going to get a high draft pick, maybe this year and next year. And that knowledgeable fan base is saying, you know what, we're in a good spot.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Just how far the bar has been lowered, right?
Well, exactly. I mean, it's amazing what 2 wins will do. in the middle of the season.
I think they've won 6 of 7 with Marty behind the bench.
I'm not arguing that, but I mean,
I've been very impressed. I figured that was a disaster. Guys never coached in the league, ragtag bunch that he got, not motivated, town down on everything. And I give them full marks. I think they've done terrific.
Actually, Mark, I was going to, you talked about Giordano being the number one defenseman. I'm surprised you didn't put Sherrod at the top of the list, Eric.
Well, I like him as a fill-in guy, and he is a guy that will waive his no trade for a Canadian team, which, of course, as you implied there, John, is an issue this year at this year's trade deadline. I just think the ask is really high. I mean, Calgary inquired after Sherrod. They were trying to get both of those guys in the same trade, and just found that the ask was too high. And I don't know what the additional ask beyond, what they gave up for Toffoli, which was the equivalent of a prospect that was a second round pick and a fifth. So that's right. A lot of draft capital going out the door for a guy like Toffoli. The reason they justified it was that he was a guy on a contract that will play for them beyond this year. Sherrod, of course, would just be a rental. Right. I think that there's a bidding war going on for Sherrod, and it'll likely go down to the wire. The one thing that's different than this year's deadline compared to last is there do appear to be more players in play. So all the managers right now that are saying, well, if David Savard can go for a first, surely Ben Sherratt should go for a first. If Foligno should go for a first, surely my guy should go for a first. And what the managers, for now anyway, they are balking at those asking prices because they're saying, well, if I don't take Ben Sherratt, then I'm going to make a bid on Calvin DeHaan. And if I don't get Calvin DeHaan, I'm going to make a bid on Nick Leddy. And if I don't get Nick Leddy, I'm going to, and there's more supply this year than there has been in the past. And it's partly because, Kevin, the conference you cover, at what point did it separate itself into top 8 and bottom 8? It seems to me it was over a month ago. Like, it was pretty clear who was going to be in and who was going to be out. And when in January already who the 8 sellers are, it just creates a larger pool of players that's available this year compared to last year, and that drives the prices down, or theoretically drives the prices down. We won't know for another week or 10 days, but I think it is going to drive the prices down. And for example, I think Seattle thought for sure they would get a first and something for Giordano, and maybe they won't right now.
Hey, they tried to get a first for him last year with the Flames.
First and a third, John. First and a third was the ask.
And Ronnie's got to know his price range.
Well, it was different at the. Sorry, Kevin. It was different at the for their expansion year than it was for Vegas's. But I also think that the implications are going to extend to this year's trade deadline. I just think that you are not, if you set your price and don't budge off of it at this year's trade deadline, you may be sitting there holding your UFA defenseman because 7 other UFA defensemen got traded for prices that the teams were willing to pay, and no one was willing to meet your price.
Yeah, the name I toss in here is because he has term is Chychrun. I think reasonably they can look for a first there, but giving up first, especially a first who could, well, typically it's not going to be in the top 10 because it's a contender. But to yield first for guys you're not getting any term on, I think is ridiculous.
With Eric Duhatschek, Kevin Paul Dupont, that leads me into what I wanted to ask. Do we overrate or maybe even underrate the value of first round picks? And I say that with this context, maybe more so or less so in hockey than a sport like basketball or even football. My sense is that in basketball and football, there are always surprises in the draft, but the feeling is that everybody has a pretty good sense of what the guy they draft can become. I think it's a little bit more of a crapshoot in hockey, principally because you're drafting 18-year-olds. Some thoughts on the value of first round draft picks in hockey: overrated, underrated, or about right? Kevin, to you first.
I think it's vastly overrated, unless you're looking at kids in the top 10 or 12. And even then, we can all look at teams that have picked in the top 10 or 12 and they got donkeys.
Mm-hmm.
They've got the guys who played 0 games or 8 games. So absolutely, 18-year-old, it would be far better if they did go back to a 20-year-old, which is not going to happen, go back to 20 years old, but have a firmer understanding. typically the NBA guys are 3-4-year-old. It's 3 or 4 year college kids. The NFL is such a different product because you can just, there are so many special situation players. You know, you don't have to play offense. You can be the nose tackle. You get that guy. I don't know if anybody's spending first round picks for a nose tackle, but you know, typically you've got proof of product over 4 years in college, and you're dialing in a very specific position. Quarterback thing, of course, can go sideways a million times, but by and large, yeah, I just think unless, and a lot of these trades, as we know now, they're top 10 or top 12 or top 16 protected.
Well, Bob, how do you measure success of a first round pick? What do you think is the measure of success?
Well, I don't pretend to have the answer to that question. I think it's a general analysis. You know, like I think the four of us can watch a player play for a year or two or 5 and determine reasonably closely as to whether he was worth that first round pick or not. And I think you can do that in almost every sport. So I don't pretend to be able to understand what analysis there is. I'm just talking in a generic sense, because first round picks are a currency that is used all the time in hockey.
Yeah. I guess.
And is it overrated or underrated?
I guess my answer to that is it isn't. Sometimes when you listen to trade discussion and people try to protect it top 10. And when you look at top 10 players in the draft and you look at the impact of those, if you go back over the last 7 or 8 years, the impact of those players in the draft has been substantial. Below 10, different story. There aren't very many David Pasternaks in the world that get drafted lower in the first round that make that type of difference.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I would say the value of a top 5 pick in the NFL is at least double a 6 to 15 pick. Because those, you know, I mean, every year is a little bit different.
Sure.
But very rarely do you see somebody who's ranked in the top 5 not go there or very close to it. You know, I watched the movie Draft Day the other day for about the 3rd or 4th time or 5th time.
You just like the music. You just like the music.
That kind of stuff doesn't happen, you know? I mean, they know. You know, a lot of teams will make those changes because of position needs, clearly. But less so in hockey.
Well, Bob, I think you used a term earlier in your analysis that is exactly right. I mean, teams treat first-round draft choices as currency, and they treat 2nd to 7th round draft choices as currency, and they swap them back and forth the way people swap Bitcoin these days. And you know, sometimes the value is way up, and sometimes the value is way down. But the one thing that I think if you got a manager on here would tell you is that, you know, you can afford to selectively trade away those draft choices because they are a bit of a roll of the dice after 15. Managers tell me that they like to be in the top 15, and there's a big difference between everything after that. So a draft choice between 1 and 15 has a certain value in their minds, and a first round draft choice from 16 to 32, you know, is almost like a second round pick. But in their minds, there's a value attached to that. And you know, if you're Calgary, for example, had traded a first round pick this year, or Carolina gave up a first round pick for Kotkaniemi in that thing, you feel that you can do it once in a while. But if you all of a sudden trade all of your first round picks for years and years and years, you know, pretty soon you're going to find that you have nothing coming through the ranks, because once you pick that guy 18th overall or 25th overall, you know, unless he's a shooting star, which occasionally happens, but you know, you're going to invest a couple more years in his junior career, a couple more years in the minors. Then you hope when he gets to the NHL, he becomes like a good player, and then you don't know what his upside is. You know, you look at, I mean, I look at Calgary because it's the team that I covered most closely. You know, the draft choices that they've hit upon that have made a difference or are making a difference on this team are Mangiapane and Gaudreau, and they weren't anywhere near the first round. You know, one was a 3rd round and one was a 6th rounder. I mean, these were guys that were perceived as flawed by scouts, and you know, mostly because of size, and have come in and are making a huge impact on the team, and then at the other end of the spectrum, you got a Matthew Tkachuk that was a 6th overall pick who's, met and probably exceeded expectations. So, it's like ordering, different items from a menu, a couple of guys from, this round, a couple of guys from that round. If they mature, if you spend the time developing them and you get enough of them to develop, not every 3rd round and 6th round pick has worked out for Calgary. Some aren't signed, most are out of hockey, but you got to hit on a couple of them. And you have to have the picks in order to have the shot at the lottery. That's really what it comes down to.
Which goes back to John's question about what makes for a successful 1st round pick, right?
Yeah.
It really does come down to Eric's point here being, you've got to come out ideally, and even this is a reach. What you hope is every draft year you come out with a couple of kids who are going to make your team. And, that's out of, anywhere from, some teams have sold out some picks, but anywhere from the 5 to 7 or 8, maybe 9 kids you pick, you hope to get 2 somewhere in there who can play. Otherwise, you end up with like the Bruins this year. Clearly bad drafts. They had to go out and get Foligno and Hollett and Forbert and Noshek. These aren't and overpay for all of them simply because they haven't stocked the shelves.
Well, and listen, what's coming back to roost for Don Sweeney is those 3 first-round picks that he had in the middle of the batch, and the success of players on other teams. I mean, how many times do Boston Bruin fans remind him of Matt Barzal at 16 when he had 13, Connor, 14, and 15? Yeah, and Kyle Connor. Yeah.
Yeah, if you really want to make a case for the bottom part of the 1st round being valuable, that's the case.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
now,
yeah,
Boston pick at 14, 15, and 16.
If they'd hit on those 3 picks with the guys that went like 17, 18, and 19, because wasn't Shabbat in there too? Didn't it go? I don't have it.
Thomas Shabbat was in there too, yeah.
Yeah, so Shabbat, Connor, and Barzal on that team right now, Kevin. Well, first of all, I don't know how you pay them, but what a difference that would make with the guys that coupled with the veterans on that team. They would be Tampa.
And the one pick that did stick wants to be traded.
Yeah.
And another one, Zaboral got hurt. His game was actually coming around as whatever he is, a number 5, 6, maybe a 4 someday.
Yeah.
And then Sinishin, who's done nothing. So that's right. Jake still wants out for reasons we don't understand.
One of the fundamental differences, well, it's 2 things I wanted to mention. Number one, almost all NFL picks are trades, and there are fewer in the NFL probably than any sport, but they're almost invariably for draft picks. The straight up exchange player for player rarely happens in the National Football League.
Did you tell Russell Wilson that yesterday?
Well, how many draft picks were involved?
Lots of draft picks, but lots of players too. So,
well, yeah, I'll give you that, but there were lots of draft picks too. And it'd be interesting to see whether Seattle valued the draft picks higher than the players that they got.
But here's the thing though, Bob, and it's the same in every league. For the unforeseeable future, a draft pick costs you no cap hit. You're not out any money. And that's what everybody's having to manage these days in this world.
Well, the other one I was going to mention to you is the NBA has a system whereby there has to be some financial equalization. It doesn't have to be dollar for dollar. But if you're going to make a trade in the NBA, you got to match up salaries to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't exist in the NHL. It exists theoretically, but it is not mandated, which is a better system. Either of you want to contemplate that?
Yeah, Bob, I don't know because I don't follow those leagues closely enough to be able to say. The one thing I will say about the NHL is that the system was changed and amended from when the salary cap first came in, largely at the insistence of Brian Burke, in order to retain money in contracts. That was not part of the original CBA and not part of the original structure of the National Hockey League coming out of that lockout and that first salary cap era. And that was changed because it had created such a trade gridlock, where, as you say, the dollars coming in had to match the dollars going out, and teams just weren't able to figure out a way of making that work. So they did change the system so that a team can retain up to 50% of the contract. But then you get into a situation like we're talking about now. I think Elliot Friedman mentioned it first, but one of the things that's in play right now is Shea Weber's contract. What's the appeal of Shea Weber's contract? Well, it has a dollar value of, or an annual value of $6 million, but the dollars are cheap. And so if you're a team like Arizona trying to get to the salary cap floor, there is value in having a player that has a nominal contract valued at $6 million, but they only have to pay him, I think, $6 million over 4 years. And then that's crazy. Or, a situation like let's say Calgary, they have a player that has, for I think injury reasons as much as anything else, underachieved. The kind of the bottom's fallen out of Sean Monahan's game. And so, you've got Gaudreau coming up this summer. You've got Tkachuk coming up this summer. You want to sign those guys, but in order to sign them, you have to figure out a way of getting Monahan's money off the books, and he's got a year left on the contract. So what are you doing? You're calling Arizona probably, you're calling Seattle probably, and you're saying, what will it take for you to take this player and this contract off of the books so that we can create the space that we have to sign the players that are still making tangible contributions? So that's messed up in my mind. The idea that half the conversations have nothing to do with he shoots, he scores, and it has everything to do with the accountant telling me how to balance my books.
Yeah.
That's fine for us in real life, but the fact that it's become such an important part of this process going into the deadline, going into free agency, 12 months of the year I think that's messed up.
We got to take a quick break because we're a little late, but I want to pick up on that when we come back with Eric Duhatschek, Kevin Paul Dupont, back after these messages. McCowan, Shannon, Duhatschek, Dupont, the four of us. I started out with on the notion of asking one question and getting it out of the way, and we've now gone 30 minutes and are still sort of on the same topic.
So we're going to give, let's see, I want 6 first-round picks for the rights to a 14-year-old, and I'll take Sean Monahan's contract.
Something like that. Yeah.
Well,
that's a deal, by the way.
Well, I want to pick up on something that Eric said there, but it's not I don't think it's what you think. But it seems like every time we have a discussion about a player like Monahan, who's the likely target? Arizona? I mean, every conversation revolves around Arizona.
Arizona, Detroit, and Seattle.
Yeah.
Well, but it's always Arizona.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can talk about mismanagement all you want, and there's justification for believing they have been mismanaged colossally. But there is also a system in place that exists in really all the sports that makes it difficult for a team like Arizona in many ways to climb out of the hole. The Pittsburgh Pirates in baseball are not going to climb out of that hole. Orlando, for one team, is trying, but it's difficult to climb out of that hole. And is there something inherently wrong with the system that allows a team like the Arizona Coyotes to manipulate at the trade deadline to do nothing more than to get to the floor?
Maybe that's Arizona's reason for being in the league.
Well, I know they can't afford to spend anymore.
It's just this dumping ground for everybody else, right?
It is.
It's kind of a 31+1 league in terms of that. I will say, to go back, it's all interesting. How do you get out? You either spend your way out or you develop your way out. And if you don't have the manager or the infrastructure in place, be it scouting, player development, all of that, you're not going to develop your way out of it. And the caveat that I wanted to bring up, or addendum to your question before, is part of the problem in the NHL that I see is so much of the top end talent, and I'll put the percentage at 90% of the top end talent is all under no trade, no move contract. So it becomes even more log jammed. I can't make comparisons to the NBA system or the NFL system. I just don't know them well enough. But we see so few real, go back to the term, hockey trades in the NHL because of that. So not only do you have the spending factors and the poor development factors, you've got probably 80 to 100 players total who really are the meaningful players in the league can't be moved. In the rare instance, you'll get the guy to waive it, but by and large, I think that gums up the system.
Well, and I don't want to dwell on the NBA by any stretch of the imagination, but there are two teams that are in the NBA that literally have developed the way out of futility: the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Memphis Grizzlies. Both up and coming teams with good young talent who literally had nothing a couple, 3 years ago.
Yeah, but there's the biggest difference, Bob, is that those teams all made money even through their bad times. They all made money. Memphis made money because of the way
Pittsburgh Pirates make money but aren't interested in spending it.
that's different, because the revenue sharing system in the NBA or in Major League Baseball allows that to happen. In the NBA, you can actually get down to a situation of being patient with the draft. You can change your team quicker in the NBA draft than you can in any other draft.
I agree.
So you're still making money and you're getting young people quickly. And all of a sudden that's a pretty good equation. Dan Gilbert, is probably much happier with this team. And then he's going to dread 4 years from now when he has to re-sign all these kids. Right. That's going to be the problem. I want to change the topic just a little bit, not 100%, just a little bit. You talked about Calgary needing to sign a couple of players. You look at what's going to happen in Minnesota next year when the cap hit for Parise and Suter comes to, I believe, it close to $14 million. You look at Colorado, who have to re-sign Nathan McKinnon, and Nazem Kadri's contract is up. Do they have to do something this year to try to win the cup because their window closes quickly this summer, Eric?
Well, I think Colorado for sure understands that they may not be the same team next year. But do they have to do something is a different question. I mean, internally they have to evaluate their goaltending right now and determine, okay, can we win with Darcy Kemper? And if Darcy Kemper gets hurt and we have to go to Pavel Francouz, who's, all considered fragile, do we have enough goaltending? And if we don't have enough goaltending, how do we solve this in the short time that's left? So I think they are doing that evaluation as we speak. I think they like their team, although it hasn't been very good the last little bit. And I think that they've seen enough of Kemper during that stretch. Like, again, he's had a couple of rough outings, but he was very good after about December 10th or whatever, when he came back from that injury. So I don't think they're going to do very much other than, make a small tweak here and there. I think they're feeling the urgency to win, but I don't think they're going to go out and make a splashy move thinking that one thing is going to take them over the top.
And what about Calgary? What about Calgary, Eric?
No, I think that the Flames have 1 foot in today and 1 foot in tomorrow.
They do,
partly because they still have Lindholm, is on a great contract. Monahan's on a great contract. Markstrom's only in year 2 of a 6-year contract, and he's made up for a lot of the odd time when things break down, which hasn't happened very often this year. He's been sensational. He's probably been the most maybe consistent goaltender in the National Hockey League this year. I think there have been other goaltenders that have had moments where they've been lights out great, but then they've had those real off nights. And the one thing that Markstrom has done that maybe not very many other goaltenders have done, Shesterkin is another one that has done this, is just a flat line level of consistency that's really good. And I don't think that if they end up losing one of their key pieces, I'm pretty sure that they don't believe they're going to lose 2. So no, I think that there's an urgency to win, partly because they haven't won in the playoffs for a long period of time, and the fan base getting very antsy. Although again, I ran into a fan at Indian Wells yesterday who's very, everybody I talked to in the fan base is excited about the team this year because they had fairly low expectations going into this year. They feel that they've overachieved, and they just want to see how far this run goes. So I think that they've bought themselves some time with the surge that they've made since October.
Yeah, testament to solid coaching too. Great coaching. Players buying into the system, of course, is critical. But you look at those two teams, and where have you got more confidence in the goaltending? Certainly Calgary. Colorado, I wasn't confident going into the season on their goaltending. And where are you going to fix that now? Is Fleury their answer? I don't think so. So I don't see them patching that up. They may not see that it has to be patched up, but I just don't think it's good enough.
I'm interested. You say Fleury isn't the answer. Is that because of economics? You don't think they can make the deal happen?
I just don't think he's there. I don't think his game is there. I don't see him as. It certainly his reputation is there, but I think today, the Fleury of today going in there, I don't think he's the difference.
Who would you take over Fleury if you needed a goaltender? And
Boy,
there are more than a few teams that aspire to win a Stanley Cup that are probably thinking about it. If not Fleury, then who?
Bob, I don't think, and before the guys jump in, because they're the experts, I don't think there's a real pool of good goaltenders available right now.
That is my point. Exactly, John. I mean, and that's what I was trying to get at. Like, we can talk about has-beens, never-weres, whatever, but other than Fleury, and I'll concede, Dupont, your point. I'll concede that he doesn't look like he's as good as he did certainly in Pittsburgh and even in Vegas a couple of years ago. But is this a guy you would discount the possibility of him standing on his head in the playoffs over, 10, 15 games? I wouldn't. I think you got at least a shot if you can make the economics work. Who's number two? Who's the second choice?
Well, what I would tell you, Bob, if we were having this conversation around Christmas or just before Christmas, I would have nominated Jonathan Quick of the Los Angeles Kings, because Quick has almost the same playoff pedigree as Fleury.
I'll give you that one. Yeah.
And he's been excellent. The problem, not a problem in Los Angeles, is that they're suddenly second in the Pacific Division standings, and they're probably going to make the playoffs in a year where very few people thought that they would make the playoffs. And how can you trade a player that has given you that kind of, goaltending, when you've got a playoff team? So, like, he's just, I hear his name out there a little bit. I think teams are making inquiries. I think Cal Peterson has played a little bit better here. I don't think they're
ready to make the move.
No, I don't think.
By the way,
Chicago would make the move with Fleury.
LA would have made the move 2 years ago. LA might have made the move last year, but now that he's playing so well, I don't think they can. I really don't think they can.
And that's my point. That he would have been the one guy that could have been in this conversation that probably isn't right now.
this is a flight of fancy, but I'll throw it out there. Panthers look like they're loaded, and they're going to go with Bobrovsky.
Mm-hmm.
Would they move Spencer Knight? Which would sound ridiculous, but Spencer Knight, I think, could do it. And maybe there's a real hockey trade there to make.
Gosh, I tell you what, they've left Spencer Knight in the American League so he just gets enough games and keeps playing enough, because Bobrovsky's got the net right now.
Right.
And I just think they're waiting for the moment they can bring Knight up to be their second or third goalie at the appropriate time in the playoffs. And it wouldn't surprise me that when the playoffs start, we end up seeing both of them. I really don't.
So are you suggesting, Kevin, that they might push Knight for a more experienced goaltender, or for help elsewhere?
If they were to move Knight, I think they'd move Knight for a real defenseman.
Right.
Yeah.
That would be my sense there. And again, as I preface this, flight of fancy, I will also say that it underscores how kind of capricious the whole goaltending can be. You couldn't have given away Bobrovsky for 50 cents on the dollar 10 months ago.
That's
exactly.
right.
And now what, 30 wins, close to 30 wins?
So it's interesting. So the Toronto Maple Leafs, everybody believes they have a goaltending issue. Do the Boston Bruins have a goaltending issue? No, if it's a preface to a question on Kevin's team. Do you think the Bruins have a goaltending issue?
I do not. I'll be guilty here one more time of going head over heels for a young goaltender.
You like Swayman?
I love him. Yeah, I love him. I love his game. I love his attitude. He's extremely quick side to side. And the reason I'm sort of, if you will, keep fingers crossed on this one, you don't know about these kids until they're 2-3 times around the league. Right. And then it's harder than ever now because of the imbalance of the schedule. But you got to see them against these teams 2 and 3 times to make sure that everybody else hasn't picked apart their one tiny flaw that's going to take them from being considered in the top 10 goaltender discussion to some guy who's hanging on in the American League.
Yeah. Well, here's what I would tell you, Kevin. You did a wonderful profile of him going into the season. And as a result of that, I drafted him in my fantasy hockey pool and was very pleased with how he was doing until I signed Tuukka Rask, and now he's in the minors, and I'm in first place. And so I did one of those things that NHL general managers should never do.
You panicked.
I traded him and got something for today. I am still hanging on in first place, but I'm looking at Jeremy Swayman's salary, thinking he could be my goalie for the next 5 years, and now he belongs to Mike Zeisberger, and I'm not very happy with myself. So I should have stayed the course, which I think is the lesson that real general managers should have too. In fact, I always say this, Bob McKenzie and I used to argue about this or discuss it, about, should writers be involved in fantasy? And Bob's thing was, no, you shouldn't, because then you end up rooting for players. And I was like, nah, I don't do that. But what I do is I find, especially in a pool with other hockey writers, it forces you to go through the steps that real general managers have to take in order to make trades. And you have to analyze in your own mind, you're sacrificing a little bit of something for today, for tomorrow. and for me, it's a valuable exercise. It forces me to pay attention to the minutia of the league, which I probably wouldn't at this late stage, but I do now. And plus, like a lot of us, I like to win. And so, you want to think that you're smarter than the next guy, or you can outsmart them, or maybe you're just going to get luckier this year. It's a useful exercise, and we play for such low stakes that really it's just about bragging rights and being in, David Schultz's, monthly screed that he publishes on the website that gets us all laughing our heads
Okay,
off.
so let's be clear then before we go. Let's be clear, Eric. You are the John Ferguson Jr. who traded Tuukka Rask to the Boston Bruins because you panicked in the summertime.
I freely acknowledge that I panicked. I will say this, though. The difference is I am in first place. I'm 10 points clear, and I think I am going to win. So isn't that how Cliff Fletcher justified the Brett Hull trade? It doesn't matter what you gave up in the end if you win. And that believe me, if I don't win, it's going to feel a lot worse than it does right now.
Well, and so to quote, to finish the episode, to quote Cliff, draft schmaft.
Something like that, yeah.
That was the exact quote. Guys, time is our enemy. I'm shocked. I anticipated this show would go in a completely different direction, and we managed to fill up all the time with this somewhat interesting, but
Bob was interested in the trade deadline. Mark your calendars.
Well, from a whole different bunch of perspectives. What we didn't get into too much was this guy, this fourth liner for that fourth liner. And that's what made it interesting, I think, at least for me. Boys, it's always our pleasure. We greatly appreciate your time, and we'll look to talk to you again soon and down the road. Stay healthy, okay?
All right, lads. Thank you.
Eric Duhatschek, Kevin Paul Dupont. We'll come back and wrap it after these messages. And we're back. McCowan, Shannon, thanks to Eric Duhatschek, Kevin Paul Dupont for joining us. I know you don't, I think you disagree with me. At least you don't agree with me on the notion that while the Toronto Maple Leafs undoubtedly are trying to do something, as all teams are, they're all trying to do something. You can't say they're not trying. I don't know exactly what they want.
As the guys talked about, if you're flawed, you want to fix it. And the Maple Leafs are flawed.
Well, and we spent a fair bit of our time with the two guys talking about goaltending and who's available and what you might do. I submit to you again, as I have on numerous occasions, and you have resisted in agreeing with me, the Toronto Maple Leafs are not going anywhere with this duo of goaltenders playing the way they are. And if you keep these two and don't make a move, especially if you make a move elsewhere, I think it's a complete waste of time. I don't think this team has confidence in their two goaltenders. I don't think the goaltenders have confidence in themselves. And I sure as hell don't have any confidence in either one of them. They have been at best, mediocre.
Certainly from the 1st of January.
for weeks.
Yeah. Here's the deal. I think we should only be talking about one goal, because I don't think Peter Mrazek can win squad. I don't think
guarantee he can.
But I think the other guy can, and I think Jack Campbell can.
And if Jack Campbell plays the way he did for the first 3 months of the year or so, of course.
And there's no reason to
come close to that.
No, and that's obviously a concern. But there are ways to get through that, and there are ways for him to play through it. And I think
bigger pads.
That's illegal now, Bob.
It's always been illegal, just depending on how much.
No, not what. Remember, Garth Snow used to have the lacrosse.
Oh my God, yeah.
So
I lived in horror through that whole episode.
I would tell you, I think that, and this goes back to even our discussion with Kyprios and Millard on Monday, was they have their goalie, and it's Jack Campbell. And Jack Campbell has to find a way to play through this, because you don't want, and you're going to laugh at this. You don't want to mortgage the future to go try to get Marc-Andre Fleury for one last stint. You don't, because there's nobody else out there. And so what you'd have to give up for Fleury, to me, is not that much better than Jack Campbell. And there's no guarantee that Marc-Andre Fleury can be the difference maker. What they do need to do is maybe go find 2 defensemen. Use their dollars and find 2 defensemen and protect their goaltender better under these circumstances. I mean, if they could find a way to get both Mark Giordano and Ben Sherratt on this roster, and I would not put anything by this guy.
Would you trade Riley?
Guy. No, Riley's. They just signed Riley. You're not trading Riley.
Well, who are you going to trade? Those are two teams that are crummy and want to get better and probably want young players and draft choices.
Okay, I still have a couple draft picks I can give up.
Yeah, but if you trade young players and draft choices,
because I'm playing for my job.
Now you got no cap space.
I'm playing for my job. I'm playing for my job for next year, and Sherratt and Giordano can be good rentals for me.
I don't argue either one of them. I'd take both of them if I could. Right. So how are you going to make that fit under the cap?
That's not my problem. That's Kyle's problem.
It is your problem, because you're suggesting that that's doable, and I'm telling you it's not doable.
I think he might. It all depends on
Jake. Who do you want to give up?
No, but
you want to give up Nylander?
No, I'm not. They're not giving up a big name.
Of course they're not.
So the question becomes,
otherwise the economics don't work.
The real issue here is what happens with Muzzin's contract. Is he going to stay on LTIR until the end of the season? Well, because remember, there's no cap in the playoffs, Bob.
No,
you got to get me through from March 21st to April 30th. You got to get me through for just over 5 weeks, and then I'm home free.
If Muzzin stays on long term, do you have room to take either one of them?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Sure you do. Sure. Absolutely. I think that's and that will solve a lot of your that will solve a lot of your problems. Yeah, that would, because I'm paying for my job right now. If I'm Kyle Dubas, in my opinion, I'm playing for my job.
Well, that's what I've been saying for the past while. And now you're agreeing with me. You were arguing with me before. Yeah, you thought he had at least another year.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
I did not. This was it. This is the year, big boy. This is the year.
That's what I've been saying. I thought last year was the year, and they gave him one more. And I said, all right, well, this is it then for sure. And what I don't know, what you don't know either, is where the bar is. How far do the Maple Leafs have to advance to save Kyle Dubas's job? Here's what I believe.
They have to win a round.
If he doesn't win a round, he's gone. Maybe he has to win 2.
We'll see.
We got to go. Do you want to give people a sneak preview? Who's coming up on Friday?
Yeah, we're going to talk to Steven Stamkos.
Yeah, the captain of the Tampa Bay Lightning,
the Stanley Cup champion Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yeah. So just a sneak peek of what's coming up in a couple of days. We'll be back tomorrow. Richard Deitch will join us then. Stick around. Thanks for watching or listening. Goodbye, everybody.